Think you know vans? What if I told you some 1960s models were so tough they could survive a zombie apocalypse? We've dug up the most reliable vans from that era. Trust me, the last one on this list will blow your mind. Ready to find out which one? First up is the Volkswagen Type 2, or as most people call it, the VW Bus. This was a cultural icon. Made from 1967 through to 1979, it really hit its stride in the late 1960s. The heart of this beast was its air-cooled engine, a simple design that was tough as nails. It came in all sorts of flavors: the basic transporter, the cool camper, and the groovy passenger bus. You could fit a whole family or a small band in it, making it super useful for just about anyone. Now, let's talk numbers. The engine was a flat 4, and depending on the year, it ranged from a 1.2-litre to a 1.6-litre. Horsepower wasn't exactly earth-shattering, with early models making around 30 to 40 horsepower and later ones topping out around 50 to 60, but these engines were about more than speed. They were about reliability. The compression ratio was between 6.6 to 1 and 7.8 to 1. The transmission was a 4-speed manual, and it was pretty much bulletproof. It had a more advanced rear suspension setup with semi-trailing arms instead of swing axles. Drum brakes all around did the job. It's worth noting that it had a top speed of around 60 to 70 miles per hour, and it could handle almost any road, from smooth highways to bumpy dirt tracks. People still love these things today, and a well-kept one from the 60s can cost you a small fortune. While the VW Bus was all about peace and love, the next van on our list took a more get-it-done approach. Let's take a look at the Ford Econoline, a van that was as tough as they come. What made this American workhorse stand out from the crowd? And how did its unique engine placement redefine stability for vans of its time? The Ford Econoline, especially the first generation made from 1961 to 1967, was a workhorse through and through. It was built to haul stuff, plain and simple. Ford took a different approach with its engine placement. The engine was actually placed between the front seats, making it a cab-over design, similar to the Dodge A100. This made it more stable and easier to drive, especially when loaded up. This van came with a range of reliable inline-6 engines. The most common ones were the 170 cubic inch and 240 cubic inch options. The 170 made around 100 horsepower, while the 240 could get you closer to 150 horsepower. They were designed to handle hard work and needed very little maintenance. The compression ratio for these engines was around 8.5 to 1, which wasn't too high, making them less likely to have any issues. The transmission was a 3-speed manual as standard, with an automatic option later on. The suspension was pretty basic, with leaf springs in the back and coil springs in the front. Drum brakes at all 4 corners were the standard back then, so don't expect modern stopping power. It could easily do 60 to 70 miles per hour. Whether you were a plumber, an electrician, or just someone who needed a reliable hauler, the Econoline was the van of choice. You'd see them everywhere back then, and some of them are still running today. But what if these vans were not just metal boxes on wheels? What if they had secrets and stories that made them even more interesting? Keep watching to find out about the little-known quirks of these vans. Now, while Ford was busy building vans for work, Chevrolet decided to go a different way. They came out with the Corvair Greenbrier sports wagon. It was a unique van, to say the least, and here's the scoop. The Chevrolet Corvair Greenbrier sports wagon was a real oddball, but in a good way. It was based on the Corvair car platform, which meant it had a rear engine just like the VW Bus. It had a unique look, and its smooth, flat-6 engine made it kind of fancy for a van. This 6-cylinder engine was air-cooled, with a displacement of 140 or 164 cubic inches. The 140 cubic inch engine had around 80 horsepower, and the 164 could get you up to 95. The engine had different versions with compression ratios ranging from 8.0 to 1 to 9.2 to 1, depending on the model year and carburetor setup. It also had a unique suspension setup with independent suspension all around. The transmission came in a few options, a 3 or 4-speed manual, or even a 2-speed automatic. It could cruise comfortably at around 70 to 80 miles per hour and had a unique ride for a van. The Greenbrier was designed to carry both people and stuff, making it a good all-rounder. While it wasn't as popular as the Ford or VW, it developed a loyal following, and people still dig its unique style and smooth ride. But here's a curveball you probably didn't see coming. Did you know that vans in the 1960s weren't just tools for hauling cargo or taking road trips? The CIA allegedly used vans like the VW bus and the Ford Econoline in secret Cold War surveillance operations. That's right, some of these peace and love or get-it-done vehicles were decked out with high-tech listening equipment disguised as flower power vehicles or work trucks. Imagine pulling up next to what looked like a regular van in the 60s, only to find out it was actually eavesdropping on you for Uncle Sam. Vans like these were the original spies on wheels. James Bond wishes he had one. Keep this in mind as we move on, because the next van on this list may have looked quirky, but it was just as capable of hiding a secret or two. Now getting back to our list, while the Corvair was being quirky, Dodge went and built a van that was straight to the point. The Dodge A100 was a classic American van, and here's why it was awesome. The Dodge A100 was a typical American van with a forward control cab-over design. It was built from 1964 to 1970, and it had a reputation for being tough and dependable. What made it stand out was its range of engine options, including powerful V8s. Dodge offered inline-six engines too, but the V8s were the ones people really wanted. The most common ones were the 273 cubic inch and 318 cubic inch V8s, pushing 180 to 230 horsepower. The compression ratio was usually between 8.5 to 1 and 9.2 to 1. It was a classic, reliable engine. The transmission could be a 3-speed manual or a 3-speed automatic, depending on the engine and year. The suspension was very typical for the time, with leaf springs both at the front and rear. Drum brakes were standard but still got the job done. The Dodge A100 could hit 80 to 90 miles per hour. It was popular among tradespeople and custom van builders, which is why you still see them around at car shows. It was a no-nonsense kind of van that you could depend on. While the Americans were making big vans across the pond, the Brits were making smaller, more efficient vans. Let's take a trip to the UK to explore the Austin Morris J2. What made this British van such a favourite for mail carriers and delivery workers, and how did its design conquer even the roughest roads? The Austin Morris J2 was a very common sight in the UK and other countries that were part of the British Empire. This little van was popular for its simplicity and toughness, and it was super easy to fix. The J2 had a simple inline-4 engine, typically around 1.5 litres, making around 40 to 50 horsepower. The compression ratio was about 7 to 1. These engines were known for being very reliable. The transmission was a 3-speed manual, with 4-speed becoming available later. The suspension used leaf springs at the front and rear, making it easy to handle potholes and rough roads. Drum brakes were standard on all 4 wheels, and it could easily do 50 to 60 miles per hour. Its small size made it great for cities, so if you were delivering the mail or bread, the J2 was the van to have. The J2 was a reliable van that was simple to fix with simple tools, which is why so many are still running today. Right on the heels of the J2, the Bedford CA was another popular British van that you'd see all over the world. Let's see what made it so reliable. The Bedford CA, made by Vauxhall, was another British van that got a lot of use worldwide. This was a very useful and dependable van, often used as an ambulance, a camper, and all sorts of things. The CA had a simple, straightforward design that made it easy to take care of, but it did have weak front suspension components that often wore out quickly. Later models improved on this. The engine was an inline-4, usually around 1.5 or 1.6 litres, and it made about 50 to 60 horsepower. The compression ratio was around 7.5 to 1, keeping it running smooth. The transmission was a 3-speed manual. The suspension used leaf springs at the front and rear, which was great for dealing with rough roads. Like most vans of the era, it had drum brakes at all 4 corners. The Bedford CA could easily cruise at around 60 to 70 miles per hour. It was known for its simple, honest design, and that made it a favorite for many users. Now, as good as those European vans were, it's time to introduce a van from the East. This one marked the beginning of a new era for dependable vans. Let's talk about the Toyota Light Ace. Although it debuted in the late 1960s, was a sign of Toyota's growing reputation for making super reliable vehicles. This little van was small, but it packed a lot of punch in terms of efficiency and dependability. It was basically the precursor to Toyota's famous vans from the 70s and 80s. The Light Ace came with a 1.2 or 1.3-litre inline-4 engine. These engines made about 60 to 70 horsepower. The compression ratio was around 8.0 to 1, so nothing that crazy. But this engine was tough as nails. The transmission was a 4-speed manual. The suspension was also very basic, with leaf springs at the front and rear, and had drum brakes on all 4 wheels. The Light Ace was capable of around 65 to 75 miles per hour. It was small and easy to handle, which made it great for delivery work in cities. While it might not be as famous as some of the other vans on this list, the Light Ace definitely earned its place as a very reliable van. But here's the thing about these vans. It wasn't all sunshine and smooth sailing. The VW bus, while great, could be a bit slow and prone to rust. The Ford Econoline was tough, but the simple suspension meant it wasn't the smoothest ride. The Chevrolet Corvair Greenbrier, with its rear engine, had some tricky handling characteristics, and parts could be a pain to find. The Dodge A100 could be pretty thirsty, especially with those V8s. The Austin Morris J2 was very basic and had very slow speed. The Bedford CA, while dependable, wasn't exactly a speed demon, and the Toyota Light Ace, while reliable, wasn't always the most comfortable. These quirks, while often overlooked, are just as much a part of their history as their reliability. And there you have it, a deep and detailed look at the most reliable vans from the 1960s. From the iconic VW bus to the Toyota Light Ace, these vans were built to last. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this awesome journey into the world of vintage vans. You never know what other vintage secrets are out there waiting to be found.